Ancient books written long before the modern world, as we know, predicted events that would shake the very foundation of the 21st century.
The smoke is filling the entire area. Let's go! Come on, go, Brad, go!
From technologies to global challenges and conspiracies, these predictions feel more like foresight.
Experimental brain-computer interface that allows patients to control technology with their mind.
But how could someone who is living in an entirely different era envision what our world would become? Some of these prophecies are so accurate they'll send shivers down your spine. So let's get in and see what writers in the past have been up to, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything. Number 25, Nostradamus, Les Prophéties, 1555. Nostradamus was born in France in 1503. This 16th century seer claimed to glimpse into the future and left behind many prophecies. His most famous work, Les Prophéties, published in 1555, contains hundreds of predictions written as cryptic, four-line poems called quatrains. These verses were vague, yet strangely compelling, hinting at wars, disasters, and monumental events. But what makes Nostradamus so famous? Some believe he predicted major historical events. For instance, he described the death of a young lion in a duel, which many claim matches the accidental death of King Henry II of France during a joust. Then there's the French Revolution. Nostradamus spoke of chains and the slaves rising, linked to the chaos in 18th century France.
Like and subscribe right now, and you'll have amazing luck for the rest of the week.
It's also believed that his writing foresaw the rise of Napoleon and Hitler. Words like Hyster, a possible mistranslation or coincidence, are often interpreted as a reference to Adolf Hitler. And let's not forget the eerie links to 9/11 that many say his quatrains described as fire in the sky. But many people still argue that Nostradamus' writings are too vague, that are open to endless interpretation, and apply to almost anything. But the uncanny connections are hard to ignore. Number 24, Baba Vanga. Baba Vanga, the blind Bulgarian seer, made some accurate predictions that have kept the world on edge for decades. She was the one who predicted the rise of global warming, a concept that was just beginning to gain attention in scientific circles back in the 1960s. Vanga saw the Earth's climate shifting in dramatic ways, and today, as we battle heat waves, wildfires, and rising sea levels, it's clear her warnings were far ahead of her time.
Antarctica and Greenland melt into the ocean. They are adding water to the sea, raising the sea level everywhere.
But that's not where her foresight stops. There's her prediction about biological weapons. Vanga saw a big country conducting terrifying experiments with biological warfare. This has come true, and today many nations struggle to manage and prevent biological threats, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. What's more terrifying is that her predictions tell that a conflict in Europe will devastate the continent's population in 2025, but only time will tell if that turns out to be true as well. Could she have seen the invisible dangers we'd face in our world? Number 23, The Machine Stops. E.M. Forster, 1909. In 1909, E.M. Forster, an author best known for his literary classics, wrote a short story called The Machine Stops. This story is believed to be a work of science fiction, and it predicts 21st century technologies like the internet and social media. The writer actually predicted video chatting over 100 years ago. The whole story is set in a dystopian future where most people live isolated lives and are dependent on machines. And when they want to talk to someone, they don't visit in person. Rather, they use a device, a glowing plate to see and speak with loved ones across the globe. In his words, a faint blue light shot across it, darkening to purple, and presently she could see the image of her son, who lived on the other side of the earth, and he could see her. This really does sound like FaceTime or Skype. But the chilling part is that he didn't celebrate this technology. He actually warned us about a world where human connections are replaced by screens, where people stop interacting face-to-face and let technology control their lives. Isn't that uncomfortably close to how we live today? Number 22, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, Edgar Allan Poe, 1838. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published his only novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The novel tells the story of Arthur Pym, who finds himself on a doomed ship called the Grampus. The crew got stranded in the middle of the ocean and faced hunger and desperation. When their supplies ran out, they drew lots to decide who would make the ultimate sacrifice to save the others. A young sailor named Richard Parker becomes the victim of cannibalism. Fast forward to 1884, nearly 50 years after Poe's novel. A yacht called the Mignonette sets sail from England to Australia. It sinks, leaving 4 men stranded on a tiny dinghy, starving and hopeless.
The only
food they had were 2 cans of preserved turnips, no fresh water.
Just like in Poe's book, the men decide that one of them must die to save the rest. And who is chosen? A young sailor named Richard Parker. Yes, the name and the horrifying fate were the same. What's even stranger is that Poe's novel, though now a literary classic, faded into obscurity after its release. This can't be a mere coincidence, I believe. Number 21, Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan, Morgan Robertson, 1898. The Titanic tragedy is one of history's most infamous events. But did you know that a novel published 14 years before the Titanic even existed seems to have predicted its demise in detail? In 1898, Morgan Robertson wrote Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. The story followed a massive ship called the Titan that was deemed unsinkable. The Titanic, completed years later, was just 82 feet longer. Both ships carried far too few lifeboats. 24 for the Titan, 20 for the Titanic, and the disasters were totally identical. In Robertson's book, the Titan strikes an iceberg on the starboard side while traveling through the North Atlantic in April. While the Titanic hit an iceberg in the same spot and in the same ocean in the same month, that is April 1912. That can't be a coincidence? Robertson himself claimed he wasn't a psychic, just an experienced sailor. But how could he have guessed so many details about a ship that hadn't even been built yet? Number 20, White Noise, Don DeLillo, 1985. When White Noise by Don DeLillo hit shelves in 1985, it was seen as a sharp satire of consumerism and the rise of technology. But reading it today feels less like satire and more like prophecy. The characters in White Noise find therapy in shopping, which is really similar to today's obsession with self-care, where consumption is marketed as the cure to all life's problems. From luxury bath bombs to the latest gadgets, the wellness economy thrives on this exact idea. And then there's the constant feed of information. DeLillo's characters are glued to their TVs and radios and are overwhelmed by an endless stream of news. It mirrors the way we live now, like scrolling through social media, bombarded by notifications and drowning in a sea of updates. This noise isn't just in the background, it's exhausting, much like the information overload we experience every day. While White Noise doesn't predict specific technologies or events, it nails the feeling of living in a hyper-connected, consumer-driven world. It's a world where distractions are endless, and the line between therapy and consumption has all but disappeared. Number 19, Looking Backward, 2000, 1887, Edward Bellamy. Edward Bellamy predicted a future where people carry a card to pay for things instead of cash in his novel, Looking Backward, 2000, 1887. What's strange is how close his vision was to the modern debit card. In Bellamy's utopian society, citizens use a card loaded with credit to buy what they need. It wasn't just for convenience. Everyone started with the same credit balance, and those with tougher or riskier jobs got extra. In addition to predicting how we'd pay, Bellamy also foresaw where we'd shop. He described large centralized spaces for shopping, essentially inventing the concept of the modern shopping mall decades before they existed. Now, Bellamy's society had its quirks. Everyone was equal, and your work determined your credit. Sure, that's not exactly how things turned out, but the resemblance to debit cards and malls is hard to ignore. Number 18, The Plot Against America, Philip Roth, 2004. Published in 2004, The Plot Against America creates an alternate history where aviation hero Charles Lindbergh beats Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1940 presidential election. Lindbergh, who was an actual historical figure, ran a campaign fueled by fear, blame, and divisive rhetoric, and won over thousands of right-wing voters. Fast forward to 2016, and Donald Trump's rise to power mirrors much of Roth's fictional book. Lindbergh's campaign thrives on discrediting his opponents, much like Trump's. Both men are accused of having twisted morals. Lindbergh openly supports Hitler's ideology and blames Jewish people for societal problems, while Trump has been criticized for scapegoating Muslims and Mexicans. Did Roth foresee the future of politics? Or is history doomed to repeat itself when fear and division take the stage? Well, we can only think. Number 17, Earth, David Brin, 1990. In 1990, David Brin published Earth. It's a novel that was set in 2038 and feels less like science fiction and more like a preview of today's world. Brin's book sheds light on environmental catastrophe, technology, and human resilience. What's shocking is that some of his predictions have already come true. For instance, Brin envisioned a world with affordable, high-quality digital cameras and the rise of social media, much like the tools we now use daily. That's not it. His visions of environmental disaster hit even closer to home. Brin's Earth hinted at a meltdown at a major power plant, very similar to the Fukushima disaster in 2000. He also foresaw broken levees devastating communities in the Deep South, a frightening echo of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. These events, predicted decades before they occurred, make you wonder how much more of his vision will come true by 2038. His novel is more of a wake-up call that urges us to do something before things get out of hand. Number 16, The Senator's Daughter, Edward Page Mitchell's 1879. Long before the internet or modern printers were a thing, The Senator's Daughter by Edward Page Mitchell described what we now know as print on demand. In the story, characters owned personal printers in their home. These devices could instantly print the latest news and information onto a broad strip of paper that can be folded neatly into a basket. Mitchell wrote, "An endless strip of printed paper, about 3 feet wide, was slowly issuing from between noiseless rollers. Mr. Wanley bent his head over the broad strip of paper and began to read attentively. This explanation of on-demand information was incredibly ahead of its time." Number 15, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, 1932. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is a dystopian novel and blueprint of our world. In this story, people are genetically engineered, addicted to entertainment, and kept happy with pills. And guess what? Nearly a century later, Huxley's predictions feel disturbingly familiar. Take genetic engineering, for example. In Huxley's tale, humans are designed before birth to fit specific roles in society. And today, technologies like IVF and gene editing allow parents to select traits for their children. From choosing a baby's gender to screening for health risks, we've entered the age of soft eugenic. How long until we start designing perfect human? Then there's the endless distraction. In Brave New World, people avoid free thought by immersing themselves in non-stop entertainment, much like what we do today, no? Smartphones, social media, and streaming services have made sure we're never bored. But at what cost? Mental health experts say constant stimulation leaves little room for self-reflection, which is actually a key part of growth. And what about Soma, the wonder drug in Huxley's tale? It keeps everyone blissfully numb, free from pain or worry. While we don't have Soma, millions of people rely on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, or recreational drugs to go through the harsh reality. We're more medicated than ever. Number 14, Gulliver's Travel, Jonathan Swift, is 1726. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels is famous for its wild adventures. But did you know it also hides a mind-blowing scientific prediction? Written in 1726, the novel describes a flying island called Laputa, which is home to advanced astronomers. Laputa's astronomers claimed Mars had 2 moons, 150 years before Asaph Hall discovered them in 1877. But it doesn't stop there. Swift's description is surprisingly accurate. He speculated on the moon's size and orbit, details very close to what Hall confirmed. Hall named the moons Phobos and Deimos, and in honor of Swift's uncanny prediction, a crater on Deimos is named after him. What makes this even more remarkable is that Swift wasn't an astronomer. He based his idea purely on imagination and conjecture, with no evidence or advanced telescopes available in his time. Can it just be a lucky guess? What do you say? Number 13, Parable Series, Octavia E. Butler, 1993-98. Octavia E. Butler's Parable series is another dystopian fiction and features prophecy. Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents was written in the 1990s and imagined a world unraveling due to global warming, unchecked corporate power, staggering inequality, and the rise of fascism. What's truly jaw-dropping is a key detail from Parable of the Talent. The story introduces a conservative evangelical politician from Texas running for president with the slogan, "Make America Great Again." Yes, decades before the Trump era, Butler wrote about a populist demagogue who capitalized on fear, religion, and nostalgia to amass power. Butler didn't just predict slogans or political figures. She captured the dangerous consequences of unchecked greed, blind faith, and societal division. Her novels are filled with communities torn apart by extremism and a planet suffering the effects of environmental neglect. Yet, amidst the chaos, Butler also explored resilience. Her protagonist, Lauren Olamina, tries to build a hopeful future by spreading a new faith that emphasizes adaptability and survival. Number 12, Moxon's Master, Ambrose Bierce, 1910. Over 100 years ago, Ambrose Charles Bierce imagined and wrote about super-smart computers. In his 1910 short story, Moxon's Master, Bierce described a chess-playing robot that was practically unbeatable. That's IBM's Watson, the AI that dominated Jeopardy, or even the countless AI systems now outsmarting humans in games and beyond. What makes this so fascinating is how ahead of its time the story was. Alan Turing, the father of modern computing, didn't even propose his famous Turing test for distinguishing machines from humans until 1950, 40 years after Bierce's story was published. Number 11. Stand on Zanzibar, John Brunner, 1968. Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner is a science fiction masterpiece that's closely accurate about the future. Set in 2010, it predicted cultural, political, and social shifts that feel like today's headline. Brunner foresaw the formation of the European Union, the economic collapse of Detroit, and a troubling rise in global terrorism. He also envisioned the growing acceptance of gay marriage, a decline in tobacco use, and the decriminalization of marijuana. And these are the issues that were decades away from being mainstream. And here's where it gets downright spooky. Brunner imagined a charming, charismatic U.S. president named Obomi.
Barack Obama, 47 years old, will become the president-elect of the United States.
What's even more fascinating is how Brunner tackled overpopulation and the chaos it causes. Number 10. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, 1818. In 1818, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. This story wasn't just about a monster, it was about us. It asked, what happens when we play God? Victor Frankenstein's creation was a creature made from science and a warning about tampering with life. Victor built his monster using body parts from slaughterhouses and dissection rooms, trying to create life artificially. Today, scientists clone animals, edit DNA, and even debate creating designer baby. But Shelley saw the danger in these advancements long before cloning or genetic engineering became real. Her story predicted the ethical dilemmas we now face, like cloning Dolly the sheep in 1997.
Scientists say a clone was created from a single cell taken from the udder of a sheep.
Or designing traits in test tube babies. Number 9. Feed, M.T. Anderson, 2002. Back in 2002, when the internet was still finding its footing, M.T. Anderson released his young adult novel, Feed. At the time, brain chips and personalized ads were pure science fiction. But now, the world of Feed feels unnervingly real. In the story, people have chips implanted in their brains that connect them to a digital network called the Feed. This feed is everything: social media, news, and entertainment. It's where people share their lives, and corporations watch every move, targeting users with ads tailored to their habits and desires. While we don't have brain implants yet, Anderson predicted how companies would use our personal data for hyper-targeted advertising. Number 8. Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury, 1953. In 1953, Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451, a dystopian novel that predicted a future very similar to our own. Among his many ideas, Bradbury described seashells and thimble radio, tiny earphones designed to shut out the world. These devices bear a striking resemblance to modern earbuds and Bluetooth headsets, which became reality decades later. Back then, headphones were clunky and heavy, far from the sleek in-ear designs we know today. Yet Bradbury imagined people slipping tiny devices into their ear, drowning out reality with music and distraction. In the novel, Montag's wife uses these seashells to escape into her own world and to completely disconnect from life around her. Number 7. From the Earth to the Moon, Jules Verne, 1865. At a time when even indoor plumbing wasn't a norm, Verne envisioned a journey to the moon with details so accurate that it's hard not to wonder if he time traveled. In Verne's story, a group of daring adventurers builds a cannon named Columbiad that is powerful enough to launch a rocket to the moon. The rocket is designed to hold 3 passengers, just like NASA's Apollo missions over 100 years later. If that's not jaw-dropping enough, the command module of Apollo 11 was called Columbia. Coincidence? Maybe not. Verne even nailed the location debate. In his story, Texas and Florida argue over where the launch should happen. And guess what? Today, NASA's launches happen in Florida, while Texas is home to the iconic Johnson Space Center. Now, these are some really close predictions that Verne made. Number 6. The World Set Free, H.G. Wells, 1914. In 1914, H.G. Wells wrote, The World Set Free. This novel predicted one of the most destructive forces humanity would ever have, atomic bomb. This was more than 30 years before the first nuclear explosion ever took place. Wells imagined a future where scientists got the power of the atom to create explosives that could destroy entire cities. His story described a war where these weapons forced humanity to confront the chaos it had caused. Decades later, scientists like Leo Szilard, who helped develop the first nuclear bomb, credited Wells' novel as inspiration for their work. But Wells's novel warned us about the dangers of wielding such power recklessly. He believed that with great technological progress comes even greater responsibility, and it seems like it is totally up to us. What kind of world will we choose to create? Number 5, A Space Odyssey, Arthur C. Clarke. 2001. Arthur C. Clarke wasn't just a science fiction writer. He was a futurist with a knack for imagining technologies that seem eerily familiar today. In his novel 2001, A Space Odyssey, published in 1968, Clarke described a device that feels strikingly like modern smartphones or tablets. He wrote about a futuristic display unit where people could summon electronic newspapers from around the world. Users could browse headlines, search for topics of interest, and hold digital pages in the device's memory. It's essentially how we scroll through news apps on our phones during a coffee break or skim headlines on our tablets at lunch. Number 4, Neuromancer, William Gibson, 1984. 40 years ago, William Gibson released Neuromancer, a science fiction thriller that was more of a crystal ball. Written before, the internet was a household word. But this book imagined a world very similar to ours. A hyper-connected society, artificial intelligence, data theft, even our obsession with social media. You name it, it's all there. Gibson gave us cyberspace. He called it a consensual hallucination, a virtual world connecting everyone and everything. In 1984, the internet barely existed, but Gibson saw where we were headed. Neural interfaces in the book allowed people to jack into this, something companies like Neuralink are already getting onto today. Number 3, Debt of Honor, Tom Clancy, 1994. In 1994, Tom Clancy released Debt of Honor, which is a gripping installment in his Jack Ryan series. It is packed with military tactics, political intrigue, and high-stakes action, and the novel thrilled readers. But it also left them with an unsettling sense of déjà vu years later. Here's why. In the story, a commercial 747 is hijacked and crashes into the U.S. Capitol during a joint session of Congress. It's a fictional act of terror that seemed too wild to ever happen. Then came September 11th, 2000. The devastating attacks that day involved hijacked planes turned into weapons, just as Clancy had imagined years early. It was at that time that Debt of Honor didn't just remain a thriller, it felt prophetic. Number 2, Super Sad True Love Story, Gary Steingart, 2010. In 2010, Gary Steingart published Super Sad True Love Story, which is a darkly funny tale about love, technology, and a crumbling society. But many of his dystopian predictions came true almost immediately. Set in near-future New York, the novel follows Lenny Abramoff and Eunice Park as they live in a world ruled by debt, technology, and chaos. People's credit scores are publicly displayed on their device called apparats, very similar to smartphones like the iPhone. In Steingart's world, the US is drowning in debt to China, the dollar is worthless, and America faces public scolding for its reckless spending. Number 1, It Can't Happen Here, Sinclair Lewis, 1935. In 1935, as America struggled through the Great Depression, Sinclair Lewis wrote a novel, It Can't Happen Here, that shook the nation. It tells the story of Buzz Windrip, a power-hungry demagogue who wins the presidency by exploiting fear and despair. Windrip promises to lift millions of impoverished Americans, guaranteeing every citizen a $5,000 income, equivalent to $88,000 today. He vows to punish outsiders like Jewish bankers and launch an invasion of Mexico. His rhetoric is captivating, his lies endless, but his followers don't care. They're desperate, and Windrip gives them something to believe in. Once elected, Windrip opens up chaos. Political opponents are thrown into concentration camps, freedom vanishes, America spirals into authoritarianism, and refugees flee to Canada. All this happens while his loyal supporters cheer him on, blind to the destruction. That's it for today's video. What do you think about all these predictions made years before the occurrence of events? Are these only coincidences? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next video. Goodbye.